April 30th, 2016. Is that okay? Okay, so we will begin with the salutation to the Buddha 3 times. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Okay, good morning, everybody. Okay, so today we come to Sutta number 149 in the Majjhima Nikaya. This is called the Mahāsal āyatanika Sutta. So this is translated as the Great Sixfold Base. And usually the title Maha, great, is affixed to suttas which are unusually long. But this is a very short sutta, just a couple of 3 pages, but yet it's I call it a very rich sutta, in that the contents are very compressed, but also very deep. Okay, so the sutta begins when the Buddha addresses the monks and says, I shall teach you a discourse on the Great Sixfold Base. And of course, those who have been coming regularly to the class, you know that the Sixfold Base is referring to the 6 sense bases, or the 6 internal sense faculties: eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, and the mind base, the organ or faculty of thought and reflection. Okay, and so the sutta structurally, it's divided into 2 portions. We call one is the negative portion, which deals with the state of affairs for the untrained worldly person, and then the counterpart portion deals with the same subject, but from the perspective of the trained, experienced disciple, noble disciple. Okay, so the discourse begins with the Buddha says, when one does not know and see the I as it actually is, when one does not know and see forms as they actually are, when one does not know and see I consciousness as it actually is, when one does not know and see eye contact as it actually is, when one does not know and see as it actually is the feeling pleasant, painful, or neutral that arises with eye, with eye contact as condition, then one is, here it's translated, inflamed by lust for the eye, inflamed by lust for forms, inflamed by lust for eye consciousness, for eye contact, and for the feeling felt as pleasant, painful, or neither painful nor pleasant that arises with eye contact as condition. Okay, so here we have the series of events that begins based upon the I as the internal basis and visible forms as the external basis. Okay, so through the internal and on the basis of the I and forms, there arises I consciousness, which has the function of seeing forms through the I. The meeting of consciousness with the forms through the I is contact, and then in dependence upon contact, there arises a feeling. Okay, then it starts off when one does not know and see the I as it actually is. And so what is being indicated or suggested by this expression, when one does not know and see? What particular factor, which is often spoken about in the Buddha's discourses? One particular mental quality or mental state? Exactly. It's referring to avidya, ignorance. Okay, then there's when one does not know and see whatever it is as it actually is, then coming down. Then we have something which is translated when one is inflamed by lust. This is a little bit, I have to say, it's a little bit of a poetic embellishment on the part of the translator. I don't remember whether Venerable had it like that or whether I revised it since it goes back, 1985, maybe 1986, 87. But the Pali word is, it's simpler, it's just one Pali word. Sarajati, which is just an intensification of rajati, the verb from which we get raga. Raga is what is translated lust, passion, attachment. Then the Pali sarajati, I think it's probably in Sanskrit, it would probably be sanrajati. Actually, probably sanrajate. But the sun gets mutated in Pali to become the long A, sa. And so it could be more simply translated, one becomes infatuated, impassioned, attached. Okay, and then we could say, if we want to sort of transform this into a more fixed doctrinal term, what is being indicated, what doctrinal concept is being indicated by the verb sarajati? I'm thinking of something, I mean, it's correct, but there's another word that I have in mind. Right, craving or tanha. So we actually have here, in a way, it's almost like a very compressed statement of dependent origination. Where we have avidya expressed as not knowing and not seeing, giving rise to tanha, which is expressed as becoming, in my language, or maybe Venerable Nyanamoli's language, becoming inflamed by lust. Okay, so this is how the attachment to the six sense bases arises, through not knowing and not seeing them as they really are. Then one becomes attached at a very subtle level to the internal sense bases. And then at a grosser level, usually we become attached and infatuated with the objects of the senses. Forms, sounds, odors, and so forth. And also one becomes attached especially to the feeling that arises through sensory contact. In fact, here I put avijja through tanha, but we have here other terms of dependent origination. So we have the six sense bases, contact, feeling, giving rise to craving. Okay, now the text continues. When one abides inflamed by lust, fettered, infatuated, contemplating gratification. This is very important expression. The Pali is asada, is what I translate gratification. Literally, it means something closer to the sweet taste, the delightful taste. Okay, then the five aggregates, I would say now, the five aggregates subject to clinging are built up for oneself in the future. Okay, this is a rather subtle point. It's not so obvious. So, what is meant by the five aggregates that are built up for oneself in the future, it's not referring to the five aggregates that are present and visible right here and now in this life, but rather these are the five aggregates that will come into being at the beginning of the next existence. And so it is it's the ignorance working in conjunction with craving right now, attached to the six sense bases, the six sense objects, and everything else that arises. So this ignorance and craving working in conjunction are building up. As long as this bodily organism lasts, then the ignorance and craving have a very secure home in which to dwell. But when this body breaks up at death, then craving doesn't have a base on which to stand. It can't stand on this physical body any longer. But because there's that ignorance and craving still present, through their engagement, involvement with the objects of the senses, they've been building up what I would call a force, a momentum, a potency, which when this body falls away, that force or momentum brings into being the next set of five aggregates. which constitutes the beginning of the next existence. And so this, according to the Buddha's teaching, this is what we call a rebirth. People sometimes usually think, they say that Buddhism believes in reincarnation, and then they say, is it true that you will become a chicken? You can become a chicken or a dog in your next life. In a way, it's true, but it has to be expressed more subtly, otherwise it gives rise to misunderstanding. It's not that there is a self or a soul that reincarnates from life to life and it remains the same. Now it's in this body with this identity. Then it passes on to the dog or a chicken or another human being. But rather, it's certain forces in this existence, the mental forces, sort of dwelling in the stream of consciousness that project or propel, maybe not project, but propel the stream of consciousness at death into a new existence or cause a new form of existence to arise. And that new form of existence will be constituted by the five aggregates. What are the five aggregates? Memory is getting a little... Okay, very good. So bodily form, feeling, perception, sometimes mental formations or volitional activities, and consciousness. Okay, so that is what occurs in the future. And then the text says, and one's craving, and then the next phrase is very, very important, which brings renewal of being, which brings renewed existence, which is accompanied by delight and lust, and delights in this and that, or delights here and there, increases. Okay, the phrasing here is exactly what we find in the formula of the Four Noble Truths in other suttas, when the Buddha is explaining the second noble truth, the noble truth of dukkha, the noble truth of the origin or cause of dukkha. He says it's tanha pono bhavika nandi raga sahagata tatra tatrabi nandini. And you see that it says craving, which brings renewal of existence. I often come across people who say that we want to be realistic Buddhists, 20th century or 21st century Buddhists. We don't take this rebirth business. We are just sticking to the Four Noble Truths. But if you look at the Four Noble Truths, you look at the second Noble Truth, it says, tanha pono bhavika. Pono bhavika is based on puna, which means again, and bhava, existence. So puna bhava is renewed existence, repeated existence. And then when you turn this into an adjective describing something else, it becomes pono bhavika. So it's that which leads to or which brings repeated existence. And what brings repeated existence is tanha or craving. And then it's accompanied by delight and lust. Actually, I say that these are two aspects of craving. So delight is the enjoyment one experiences when one gets what one wants. And then lust or desire, raga, is the desire to get what one does not have. And then this craving is described as delighting in this and that, or delighting here and there. Because the craving, it's never satisfied with what one gets, but it's always seeking delight in this and that. You could see it. You don't have to be a very profound philosopher to see this, or a profound psychologist. What's the latest model of the iPhone? They're up to 6 already? 6S. What happened to the iPhone 4? And where are the iPhone 3s? I think I might be one of the few people in the world that thinks back nostalgically to those days when you use a telephone to make a telephone call. And I'm still getting used to hitting the little numbered pads. I still miss the days. Because I went through like 20 years without almost not using a telephone at all. So I think at the time I went to Sri Lanka, we were still using the rotary phones. When I come back, the people have these little, the cell phones were already out. I'm just bringing this up, of course, to illustrate delighting in this and that. Would anybody like an iPhone 4? I think I have one in my... It's great, a great instrument. I mean, it can do some fantastic things. I still haven't figured out how to get my email on my... And is Madonna still popular? Yeah. I mean, I remember hearing about him, I think, or reading about him when I was in Sri Lanka in the 1980s. Then I don't think I heard about him since. But then when he dies, then I see on the news they're saying, oh, this brilliant, absolutely fantastic, marvelous, creative genius. But what happened during the 1990s or 2000s? I don't know. Okay, so the craving increases, and then one's bodily and mental troubles increase. One's bodily and mental torments increase. One's bodily and mental fevers. By bodily, this is really like the fever of desire, not bodily fevers like when you get the flu. And one experiences bodily and mental suffering. Okay, so this is showing, you could say that this is showing the adinava, or the danger or the drawbacks in craving that becomes attached to, to the eye and to all of the things originating through the eye. Okay, then the same pattern is repeated for the other 5 sense bases. Okay, now we come to the counterpart to that section. This is showing, the practice of the practitioner, the one who understands the Dhamma and is practicing accordingly. And this is particularly the practitioner of insight, of vipassana. Though the commentary says that it refers to the knowledge of insight or vipassana and the noble path, that is the world transcending path. Okay, so it says, when one knows and sees the I as it actually is, when one knows and sees forms as they actually are, when one knows and sees eye consciousness, when one knows and sees eye contact, when one knows and sees the feeling that arises with eye contact as condition, then one is not inflamed by lust, or one is not attached to the eye forms and so forth. Okay, so when one knows and sees, this is indicating, you could say, panya, wisdom, prajna, or insight, vipassana, vidarshana. And then not becoming attached is a movement in the direction of viraga. Viraga is, we say, dispassion. It's the fading away of passion or lust. And so as one sees the I and so forth as it really is, and what does it mean to see the I and so on as it really is? What else? Something else has to come in. Okay, let's get it in order. I said, what does it, when one sees the I and so forth as it really is, what is one seeing about the I? Of course, that's underlying it, but 3 things. Say it. Right. Anicca, dukkha, anatta. Impermanent, unsatisfactory, or suffering, and non-self. And so one is contemplating the I forms and so forth in terms of the 3 characteristics. And to contemplate in terms of the 3 characteristics, the usual way, the approach which is suitable for most people, is to begin with impermanence. Because dukkha, it's subtler, and anatta, or non-self, is the subtlest of all. And so when one is contemplating, actually to contemplate the impermanence of the I, it's rather difficult, but the sort of easiest access to impermanence, I would say, is through the sensations of the body. Since if one observes the body, say as one is sitting, one experiences sensations in the body, and then if one keeps on observing those sensations, one sees that they are always, constantly arising and passing away. And then as the mind, the as the concentration becomes stronger and the attention more sustained, better sustained, then one can see the impermanence at subtler and subtler levels till one could focus on any sensation, and one sees that that sensation is just constantly, there's no stable, persisting sensation there, but just a constant arising of new sensations. And then if one spreads the awareness globally over the body, then the body itself becomes a mass of sensations, always arising and passing. And so one sees into the impermanence of, first focusing on the impermanence of sensations, and then through the awareness of bodily sensation, then one could focus on the sensation of the eyes and see how the eye is constantly arising and passing away. And then to the ear, if one is sitting, actually it's difficult to pick up the nose, tongue, and tongue, but the bodily sense. Okay, then what is impermanent is not to be taken as a basis of security. So in that sense, it is dukkha, which we translate as suffering, but it doesn't mean that all of these things are actually felt as misery, pain, sorrow, but rather it means that these things are not capable of yielding secure, lasting happiness. And so they're unsatisfactory, flawed, inadequate, defective. And again, one could go directly from impermanence into non-self. What is arising and passing away cannot be taken as self. I went through this when explaining the last sutta, sutta number 148, on the 6 sixes, where the Buddha argues that what arises and passes away can't be taken as this is myself. Okay, so this is seeing all of these domains of sensory experience as they actually are. That is impermanent, dukkha, non-self. Okay, and as one is seeing them as they are, then this attachment to them begins to fade away. And so the flames of lust are starting to subside. Actually, lust is maybe not such a good word here. It's more the flames of attachment are starting to subside, or the attachment is starting to become weaker, debilitated. Okay, then when one abides uninflamed, that's such a good words choice. When one abides not attached because of lust, unfettered, uninfatuated, contemplating danger. This expression here, contemplating danger, is the opposite of the expression that we had in the other portion, contemplating gratification. So we have a distinction here between two words or two ideas. Asada and adinava. Asada, gratification or enjoyment or sweet taste. This comes from seeing things as being pleasurable, enjoyable, taking them to be permanent, stable, identifying with them and taking them to be myself. And so one contemplates enjoyment in things, and then one goes in pursuit of them. But when one starts to see into the impermanent, empty nature of phenomena, then the danger starts to become exposed, the danger in becoming attached to them. Okay, so as one is contemplating the danger, then the five aggregates subject to clinging are diminished for oneself in the future. That is, through contemplating the danger, for contemplating things as they actually are, and seeing the danger or drawbacks in them, then that attachment that binds one to them starts to diminish. And as the attachment is diminished, then one is sort of wearing away the five aggregates, putting a stop to the process of building up the five aggregates. Okay, and then one's craving, again, which brings renewal of being, is then abandoned. Or I would say it's in the process of being abandoned, because one is still in the stage of insight, one has not yet reached full realization. But through the contemplation of danger, when one sees the impermanence, unsatisfactory nature of things, then craving is not able to get a grip on them, because one doesn't want to grip things that are seen as being like, maybe like burning coals. And so that craving starts to diminish. And then one's bodily and mental troubles are abandoned. One's bodily and mental torments are abandoned. One's bodily and mental fevers are abandoned. And one experiences bodily and mental pleasure. Okay, now we come to a new portion of the discourse, or there's a sort of transition here into another section. So now the Buddha is going to relate this to the Noble Eightfold Path. And so he says, the view of a person such as this, that is one who is contemplating the real nature of the I, forms, and so forth. So the view of a person such as this is right view. And I think this passage is interesting. Well, let me just go through the whole passage, then I'll come back to it. Okay, the view of a person like this is right view. His intention is right intention. His effort is right effort. His mindfulness is right mindfulness. His concentration is right concentration. But his bodily action, his verbal action, and his livelihood have already been well purified earlier. Okay, there are several things interesting about this. One is usually when we have the order or the exposition of the Noble Eightfold Path, what do we have as the first factor? And then the second factor? And then the next factors? Right. So usually we have right view, right intention first, then right speech, right action, right livelihood. Okay, but now the Buddha is speaking about those three factors, speech, action, livelihood, as having been purified earlier. And this right view, then, is not the view that comes at the beginning of the path, which we could say is I would call that the conceptual understanding of the principles of the Dhamma. The one that comes at the beginning of the path, sometimes called, this is still called mundane right view even here. But it's not yet, this has gone beyond that preliminary conceptual understanding. But now this is the right view of insight knowledge. This is where one is actually, doesn't have just conceptual understanding, but this is the right view where one is actually seeing into the real nature of things as being impermanent, unsatisfactory, not self. And then the intention here, you see, when we have the formal exposition of the Noble Eightfold Path, right intention is explained as the intention of renunciation or desirelessness, the intention of non-harming, the intention of non-ill will, the intention of non-harming. But other texts identify intention with the application of the mind. So here I understand that this isn't referring to right intention. Of course, there's an absence of desire, absence of ill will, absence of harming. But I don't think that's what's intended here. But rather, this is the intention as the application of the mind to the contemplation of the nature of phenomena. Okay, then we have right effort. This will be the energy involved in undertaking that contemplation. And then we have the mindfulness, which is right mindfulness. And where in how would we situate this right mindfulness in relation to the four foundations of mindfulness? Where would we put it? What are the four foundations of mindfulness? What's after? Yeah. Yeah. What? Yeah, well, she said mind objects, dhammas. Okay, so where amongst the four foundations of mindfulness will we put this mindfulness? What's called mind objects, yeah. But I think mind objects is not really such a good translation. I just would call it phenomena or dhammas. Because if you're familiar with the fourth foundation of mindfulness, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 2, 3. The third is the contemplation of the 6 sense bases. So one knows the eye, one knows forms, one knows the fetter that arises dependent on both One knows how that fetter comes into being, how that fetter is abandoned, and how there is no arising of that fetter again in the future. So this is now within the domain of Dhammanupassana, contemplation of phenomena. So we could assume that this meditator has already gone through the contemplation of body, feelings, states of mind, and now is in the contemplation of phenomena. And then we come to his concentration is right concentration. This is the statement that I find most interesting, because if you know the usual definition of right concentration, it's what? Can't hear. Right, it's usually defined as the four jhanas. And so there are some people who pick up that fixed definition, right concentration, the four jhanas, and then they say, that shows to practice the Noble Eightfold Path, you have to achieve the four jhanas, or at least the first jhana. But here we have right concentration as the concentration that occurs through contemplation of the six sense bases. So this is the right concentration, not as the samatha samadhi, but as the vipassana samadhi, the concentration that accompanies insight contemplation. Okay, and then it speaks about bodily action, verbal action, and livelihood have been already well purified earlier. So this is speaking about somebody who's not a beginner on the path, but somebody who has already fulfilled the components of sila, of good behavior. And so then based on good behavior, this practitioner, it seems that in the sutta there's no mention about the jhanic attainments, but has moved from good behavior, probably going through the earlier foundations of mindfulness, now into the contemplation of dhammas in terms of the six sense bases. Okay, then the text says, thus this noble eightfold path comes to fulfillment in him by development. Okay, so we have the preliminary purification of speech, action, livelihood, and now we have all the other five factors. Those are the constant factors present in the contemplative part of the path.